waivers. So I must have helped the university's number with the state their statistics. And it also helped that I got along very well with the department's administrative staff, and because it had become clear to me that some had outsized influence over decisions like those waivers. And I used that lesson I was taught by my very first gunnery sergeant, which was never annoy people who can make your life hell. Like the first sergeant, the supply staff NCO, the parachute riggers, and especially not the hospital corpsman, because he's the guy who gave the shots. So I discovered my military experience was good for something. In fact, I never touched my Veterans Educational Assistance Program money. That was a program called VEAP. You put in $1 and they put in $2. It's a lousy program that nobody misses. I eventually just cashed it in and I used it as part of a down payment on a house. But it being 1988 and having served some time in Latin America, I had another problem. OU had one of the largest populations of returned Peace Corps volunteers in the United States, and many of them were in my program. Many had served in Central America and were less than happy with the Reagan-era policies towards Nicaragua specifically and Latin America in general, and they weren't shy about expressing it when they discovered my background. Nor were the professors. So it was Thursdays at Ohio State all over again. Now, I greatly admire the Peace Corps, and I see it as a viable alternative to military service, worthy of respect. Trust me, they live and work in bad places, in bad conditions, and the chance to contract interesting and colorful diseases while serving in the face of the United States. But at that time, I was pretty conservative and also not shy about expressing my opinions. Every seminar discussion was an opportunity for what I call a spirited exchange of views. I was usually like the last cavalryman standing at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. I had one exchange with an instructor who, after asking how many veterans were in the class, we were discussing Central American political history. He then asked what service each had been in at what rank. He got to the guy next to me, and he replied, he was an enlisted National Guardsman. Steve will like this. The professor then told him he wasn't a real soldier. As a captain, I felt I had to speak up, and I reminded the professor that the Hocking River ran through the middle of Athens, and when the next flood came, he'd be very happy to see that guy with his truck full of sandbags, food, water, and medical supplies. It stunned him. He wasn't used to anyone speaking back to him. He later apologized. So that's sort of my take on being a student veteran, my experiences. Let's talk about here and now. So, given the large numbers of National Guardsmen and reservists who've served in combat zones since 9/11, I don't think anyone would make that accusation now. In fact, there's a lot about now that's different. I'm sure many of us who have served, especially after 9/11, are a bit uncomfortable with the hero label. I still don't know what to say to someone who thanks me for my service. I usually just nod and smile. There's certainly heroes out there, and there may well be some here in this room tonight, but most of us, and I know myself, just did my job. But having lived through what I just told you about after Vietnam and during the 80s, it is so much better now. So don't take it for granted. And I'm also going to say this now because I feel I have to say it, whenever possible, because if there are heroes, they're also among our families. I know my late wife, Debbie, was my hero. I learned later she suffered through her own emotional trauma while I was deployed, as well as after I returned. I like to say our families have their own firefights and experience their own emotional IEDs. So if you haven't thanked them, please do so as soon as possible. So, as a student veteran, you're in a kind of a strange in-between place. Strange, but lucky. You've been places, you've seen and done things, taken part in great and not so great things, and have a pretty well-developed BS meter. You've also got a plan and places you want to go, things to do, and just want to get on with your life. Some of you probably already have others depending upon you. You have jobs, families, and you're just trying to get through this. You're no different from a guy in 1946 who survived the Pacific or the European theater, or a guy who survived the Tet Offensive in '68, or any of the other conflicts since Vietnam that we've been in, and is now just trying to get that degree or that certification and go get his or her piece of the dream. So it's natural that you would seek out those with a shared experience so as to stay within your comfort zone while you try to transition to whatever passes for normality these days. Veterans tend to naturally congregate together. You don't have to explain anything. But consider this. One of the major criticisms, at least in Iraq, but I believe as well in Afghanistan, is that too many units only ventured out from their forward operating bases, FOBs, and the people that spent most of their time on those bases became known as FOBITs. Most of those units, they would go out, they do their set mission, they shake some hands, hand out some stuff, and then they go back inside the wire. That's been a common criticism. I would recommend that you don't have a FOBIT mentality here at home. Step beyond your comfort zone and interact with those who haven't had the same experiences with you as you, but may well have their own set of experiences from which you can learn. Got a very large international student population here, and some of those students come from some pretty tough situations. So open up and listen. And I learned this story, I'm speaking of myself here. Don't just be the guy telling war stories, okay? Be the thoughtful and considerate guy who people seek out precisely because they are not that guy. You can change preconceived attitudes others have about us. And this is critical because studies are showing that the social gap between those who have served and those who haven't appears to be widening. So don't isolate yourself. Engage. The point of college is learning, and not just from books or some guy with an abbreviation after his name presenting his view of the world after 20 years in academia. You might learn some unpleasant truths, but you'll be a better person for it. One of my favorite movies was made in 1946, Tyrone Power, and it's entitled The Razor's Edge. And it's based on the book by W. Somerset Maugham. A playboy goes to World War I, and he sees terrible things. And surviving questions the meaning of his existence, and as we know it now, survivor's guilt. He turns his back on wealth, society, his socialite fiancée, and he spends the next 10 years working in a coal mine, traveling to India, living in a monastery in Tibet, and eventually working in a market in Paris packing fish, until he runs into all his old friends there, and he uses his attained knowledge to try to help them. The point is, he realized that to understand life, he had to engage with it and do the things all his friends rejected. In the end, he attained a high level of knowledge because he stepped outside his comfort zone. And I'm not saying go climb a mountain and live in a hut, but be open to other viewpoints while you're in this particular environment. I think you'll find you're a better person, certainly one with a wider view. I know as I have gotten older, I've become more open to viewpoints that 30 years ago I just couldn't understand. Perhaps my life experiences have softened me up. But remember that the military draws people from everywhere and forges them into a tight-knit community with common goals. You joined a diverse community when you entered service, and now you're back in another one. You, better than anyone, know how to excel in this kind of an environment. Instead of thinking about civilians, think about fellow citizens. They are part of why you joined, to protect their rights as much as your own. This military, you, are something different in history. You represent a deep vein of something running through our society. It's difficult to name without sounding over the top. So maybe we truly believe in the support and defend phrase in the oath. I don't know. I know I do. So your role, whether you like it or not, is the following, as I see it. So here you are. You've experienced what most people couldn't dream of. Your age peers might have played Call of Duty, but you may well have played it for keeps. I've noticed that my friends, when I returned after both my wars, looked at me with different eyes. This was especially true of men my own age who had not the opportunity to serve or chose not to serve in the military. It does set you apart. And I noticed when I was at Ohio University, the younger students would ask my advice about all sorts of things, but mainly just life in general. Sometimes I seemed to serve as perhaps a surrogate parent or at least an older brother. I was perhaps 10 years older than them at most. While you may be only a few years older than them, you were certainly wiser. You know now the value of time, friendships, hard work, preparation, and especially integrity and loyalty, responsibility, and knowing your job, and most of all, yourself, your strengths, and yes, your weaknesses, which is, in a way, a kind of strength. So whether you like it or not, people, older and younger, are looking to you. In their eyes, you've been tested. So whether or not you think so, they do. And believing you possess some special insight or knowledge, things will be expected from you. Now, because of my training, my wife and I felt at one point I had to step forward when we saw something happening locally that we didn't think was in everybody's best interests and was proceeding in the wrong direction because of the lack of both leadership and vision. So we started a citizens group. We organized a petition. We arranged for newspaper articles on the issue. Once we engaged,